Could you envision sustaining provisions for extensive sea voyages over many years without refrigeration or readily available salt? The Vikings embarked on journeys lasting months, assailed coastlines, and established settlements, all while needing to provision their forces. Their strength resided not only in the metallurgical prowess of their swords, but also in their sophisticated food preservation techniques, which enabled them to transport substantial quantities of sustenance. Yet what if the primary secret behind their ample provisions wasn't ordinary salt, but something far more rudimentary and potent? Envision a combination of wind, acid, and smoke. Remain engaged with this presentation to uncover an extreme Viking preservation method that involved burying provisions for several months, and the rationale behind such a practice. What if I proposed that your understanding of Vikings and salt is entirely fallacious? We commonly associate medieval preservation with casks brimming with salt. However, in Scandinavia during the 8th to 11th centuries, salt was a luxury, as valuable as silver, and not universally accessible. Its extraction through seawater evaporation was a protracted and arduous endeavor. Consequently, it was infeasible to construct an entire food security system around an expensive imported commodity. The Nordic populations pursued a different course, refining inherited ancestral methods. They learned to harness the natural elements surrounding them, the biting winds, acidic dairy products, and acrid smoke from their fires. These methods were economical, dependable, and facilitated food storage on an industrial scale. The Vikings didn't merely subsist. They forged a system that fueled their expansion. Instead of relying on a single preservative, they devised a diverse array of approaches. Each technique was tailored to specific product types and seasons, forming a complex, multi-layered strategy where every component complemented the others. Their independence from a sole resource rendered their system exceptionally resilient. We apply salt to extract moisture. This is the only way it endures through the winter. How long must the fish undergo smoking? This ingenuity was the true essence of their world, evident not only in the construction of their longships or the forging of their blades, but also in the seemingly routine task of food storage. The capacity to preserve their catches or hunted game signified the ability to survive winter and ready a vessel for its voyage. It was a critical strategic skill upon which everything hinged. In this discussion, we will bypass common salting techniques. Instead, we will delve into the realm of authentic, nearly forgotten Nordic ingenuity. We will explore how air could solidify fish and how fermented milk could substitute for brine. This narrative isn't about salt, but celebrates the resourcefulness of an entire epoch. They utilized what was abundant, a cold, arid climate ideal for one of the most ancient methods, a developed dairy industry yielding acidic byproducts, and an inexhaustible supply of wood for smoke. These wind-dried fish will sustain us through the winter, and the soured milk in these jars will maintain our strength when game is scarce. We encourage you to share your thoughts. What other widely accepted myths about the Vikings are, in reality, misconceptions? Kindly share your insights in the comments, and ensure you subscribe to our channel to stay informed about future historical explorations. We traverse the vast sea not with steel, but with courage imbued by the ancient deities. Remember this when the chilling winter winds bite hard. Are you prepared to uncover how the Vikings constructed veritable food skyscrapers using solely the power of the wind? One of the principal and most widespread preservation methods was natural air drying. In the cold and arid conditions of the Scandinavian climate, this process proved extraordinarily effective. The Vikings elevated it to a level of genuine industrial production, providing sustenance year-round. The core of this technology comprised specialized wooden structures known as hjeller. These were colossal frames, or racks, fashioned from poles, erected in locations exposed to prevailing winds. They were most often constructed on the craggy coastlines of fjords, where a steady flow of cold air performed the necessary work. These appear ready for the Bergen merchants. Indeed, the wind has favored them this week. Fish, primarily caught during the winter fishing season, were suspended from these frames. The fish were eviscerated and bound in pairs by their tails, then draped over the poles. Thousands upon thousands of fish carcasses adorned these cathedrals, gradually shedding moisture under the influence of the sun and wind. Crucially, this process occurred in low temperatures, near freezing, which prevented spoilage before complete desiccation. This method required no salt, no fire, and no intricate equipment, only an understanding of the climate and judicious site selection. Wind and cold were the paramount preservatives. After several months, the fish lost up to 80% of its moisture, transforming into what is now recognized as stockfish or tørrfisk. The finished product was as hard as wood, weighed virtually nothing, could be stored for years without deteriorating, and was an ideal provision for maritime journeys. It was lightweight, compact, and exceptionally nutritious. Prior to consumption, such fish was extensively beaten and soaked in water to restore its pliability. The Vikings similarly dried meat. Thin strips were cut and suspended from the same frames, or simply in shaded, covered areas. Dried meat, or skjærekjøtt, could also be stored for extended periods. It served as a strategic reserve in anticipation of war, crop failures, or prolonged winters. The sheer scale of this production was astonishing. Archaeological discoveries and sagas recount entire facilities dedicated to dried fish production. This was not merely a means of subsistence, but also a significant export commodity. The Vikings traded their dried fish throughout Europe, exchanging it for grain, textiles, and metals. Your grain sack is light. 10 barrels for the silk and the grain. The silk is of the finest quality, 11 barrels, and we have a deal. How palatable do you believe this product remained after several years of storage? However, wind drying was only effective in arid and cold conditions. Are you prepared to discover the astonishing method they employed in damp and warm environments, and what role dairy products played in it? I am about to unveil the most closely guarded secret of the Viking larder, and it is certain to astonish you. What recourse is available when the climate is too humid for drying and salt is scarce? The Vikings discovered an ingenious solution within the byproducts of their dairy farming. They mastered the art of acid preservation using what we would casually discard today: whey. This is our ancestral practice. You must diligently monitor the smoke and ensure the barrel remains hermetically sealed throughout the winter. The Scandinavians were skilled in animal husbandry, yielding abundant milk from which they crafted cheese, butter, and the renowned skyr, a dense fermented milk product. Following the production of cheese and skyr, a substantial quantity of liquid, or misa, remained. This liquid was highly acidic due to lactic acid bacteria. The Vikings observed that this acidic milieu inhibited the growth of putrefactive bacteria. Lactobacilli created an environment where other harmful microorganisms simply could not survive. This discovery was as impactful as the invention of gunpowder in another era. They learned to leverage beneficial bacteria to combat deleterious ones. These vessels endured the winter remarkably well. Yes, but we shall require more before the next shipment. From milk springs this bounty. The fermentation process honors the gods and fortifies the body. We must never waste a single drop of the whey. The procedure was straightforward yet effective. Meat or fish was sectioned, occasionally pre-boiled, and then tightly packed into wooden barrels. Subsequently, the barrel's contents were completely submerged in this acidic whey. The barrels were sealed airtight and stored in a cellar, or simply buried underground to maintain a cool temperature. In this acidic bath, food could be preserved for months without spoilage. The meat acquired a distinct sour flavor and became remarkably tender. In Iceland, this method was termed sursaðr. Virtually everything, from meat to offal to harvested crops, was preserved in this manner. May the gods bless us with full bellies and strong arms. Drink well. This was the quintessential method for preserving food during humid summers or mild autumns. It demanded no fire, no refrigeration, and no costly ingredients, merely a barrel and a byproduct of dairy production, which was perpetually abundant. It constituted a closed, waste-free system. This preservation technique not only safeguarded protein, but, in essence, pre-digested it. The acid broke down tough fibers, rendering even the most aged and fibrous meat palatable. For those consuming coarse provisions, this conferred an additional advantage.
Meat, while it's hot. The sour brine penetrates the fibers, tenderizing the meat and ensuring its preservation until spring.
This method necessitated meticulous attention. Ensuring complete airtightness and precise acidity was paramount, otherwise the barrel's contents could spoil. However, through centuries of practice, the Vikings perfected this technology.
The seal must be absolutely perfect, lads, or the winter provisions will be ruined. Observe how the pitch fills the gap. Now, set the bung.
Acid-filled barrels were as integral to their daily existence as swords or axes.
They provided stability in a world perpetually threatened by hunger.
If you find this method ingenious, please like this video.
Remember, lads, this isn't merely ordinary acid. It is the crucial element for forging the strongest steel in the North. Guard it with your lives.
Can you surmise which technology the Vikings refined, a technology that we utilize every time we engage in outdoor cooking? When wind drying was impossible due to humidity and fermented milk products were insufficient, the third element came into play: fire. More precisely, its derivative, smoke. Smoking offered a dependable method not only for preserving food but also for imbuing it with a distinct flavor.
Here, brother, try some. You won't find better.
The Vikings employed two principal smoking techniques, cold and hot. Hot smoking was essentially a cooking process. Food items were positioned directly over a fire, simultaneously baking and absorbing smoke. Such provisions had to be consumed swiftly and were not intended for extended storage.
I already told him the fjord was frozen.
Cold smoking represented the true skill of preservation. This procedure was prolonged and labor-intensive. Products were placed in a specialized smokehouse, or simply in an enclosed space, distant from the fire source. The fire smoldered on the side or in a pit, allowing only dense, cool smoke to permeate the smokehouse. This smoke, never exceeding 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, gradually enveloped the produce. The process could extend for several days or even weeks. During this period, the smoke not only extracted moisture but also infused the meat and fish with specific compounds like phenols and aldehydes from the wood. These substances possessed potent bactericidal properties, forming a protective film on the product's surface that inhibited bacterial growth. Concurrently, the food became more compact, dehydrated, and developed a characteristic golden brown hue and deep aroma. Specific wood types, often alder, juniper, or beech, were utilized for smoking as they yielded the desired smoke. Each wood imparted its own particular taste. In this regard, the Vikings were true gourmets, keenly aware of which wood best suited fish and which was ideal for meat. Smokehouses were frequently simple constructions, such as pits covered with branches or small wooden sheds lacking windows. The primary objective was to ensure a consistent flow of thick smoke while preventing open flames, a task that demanded uninterrupted vigilance day and night. Smoked meat and fish could be stored for months. They could accompany long sea voyages without fear of spoilage. Unlike dried stockfish, smoked items did not necessitate such extensive preparation before consumption, though they were often boiled nonetheless.
Taste the fish, my dear. It looks delicious. Thank the gods for this meal.
Which of the smoked foods we consume today do you believe most closely resembles those ancient practices? But what if I revealed that the Vikings neither dried nor smoked their most prized provisions, but instead entrusted them to the earth itself? In the upcoming segment, we will delve into the most unusual preservation technique: storage in swamps and permafrost. Not all foods could be effectively dried or smoked, especially fatty items like butter. For these, the Vikings employed a distinct and wholly unconventional approach, utilizing the earth as a colossal natural preservative. It was a technique founded on two elements:
cold, and the absence of oxygen. In northern latitudes, the ground either froze deeply or remained partially thawed in certain areas. The Vikings excavated deep cellars or pits, leveraging the permafrost as a natural freezer. In such storage facilities, meat, fish, and butter could lie for months, staying as fresh as if in a modern refrigerator. This method required no expense beyond the physical labor of constructing the cellar. It represented an optimal system for prolonged storage of provisions. Archaeologists uncover the remnants of such cellars, which were an indispensable feature of any major Viking settlement. This crossbeam is almost perfectly preserved. Yes, I've logged the coordinates. The state of preservation here is unlike anything we've ever witnessed. Observe the carving here. It matches the pattern on the Oseberg ship. Incredible. We must document this immediately. Even more astonishing was their use of peat bogs. These bogs were not merely perilous swamps, they were colossal natural canning jars. Sphagnum moss creates a unique environment, highly acidic, cold, and crucially, oxygen-free. In such anaerobic conditions, putrefactive bacteria simply cannot thrive. The bog conceals many secrets and many dangers. Tread carefully, for the hungry earth awaits. The Vikings, much like other northern European peoples, submerged wooden barrels filled with oil into these bogs. Shielded by the wood and immersed in the peat's acidic environment, the oil could be stored not merely for years, but for decades. This product is historically recognized as bog butter. When such barrels are discovered today, the oil inside often remains identifiable, though it develops a specific pungent flavor and a waxy consistency. For the Vikings, this was a dependable means of preserving a valuable fat source in anticipation of a lean winter or warfare. The same principle was likely applied to meat. Pieces of meat wrapped in skins or placed in containers could also be lowered into peat bogs. The acidic environment and oxygen deprivation mummified the product, rendering it unpalatable to bacteria but suitable for human consumption after processing. Today, it is challenging for us to fathom burying food in a bog and considering it a reliable storage method. Yet, in a world devoid of artificial refrigeration and industrial preservatives, it represented an ingenious engineering solution, illustrating the Vikings' profound connection to their land. Are you prepared for the shocking truth about what the Vikings ate when no other sustenance was available? There was a practice that to us today appears to be one of the most extreme culinary customs globally. We are referring to fermentation taken to its extreme, and the most striking illustration is the renowned Icelandic hakarl. This method was applied to Greenland shark meat. The challenge was that this shark meat is poisonous when fresh. It contains substantial quantities of urea and trimethylamine oxide, rendering it unsuitable for consumption. However, the Vikings could not afford to discard tons of valuable protein. The gods are testing us with this foul meat. How can we preserve it? We'll smoke it longer. Let the fire purify the poison. They devised a complex, months-long detoxification process. First, the shark carcass was gutted and sectioned into large pieces. These portions were then placed in pits dug in the gravel or sand along the ocean shore. The pits were covered and weighted down with substantial stones. Under this pressure, the meat was left to ferment for several months, typically 6 weeks to 3 months. During this period, the toxic fluids, compelled by the weight of the stones, drained from the meat and were absorbed into the ground. Intricate biochemical processes transpired within the pieces. Subsequently, the matured meat was retrieved from the pits. It was no longer poisonous, but had acquired an incredibly pungent, characteristic ammonia odor. Nevertheless, the process did not conclude there. This was merely the initial stage of preservation. Then the pieces of shark meat were suspended on the same wooden racks we previously mentioned. There they hung for several more months, slowly air-drying in the cold wind. The wind dissipated the remaining ammonia scent and transformed the fermented flesh into a solid product ready for storage. The outcome bore little resemblance to fresh fish. It was a product with a distinctive, acquired taste that could be stored for a very extended duration. It was pure, concentrated protein that saved countless generations of Icelanders from starvation. We lost 3 good men to the ice before we discovered the cave. Without this dried venison, none of us would have seen spring. Would you dare to sample such a dish, knowing its preparation? They prepared all this food, but how did they store it in their homes and aboard their ships so it remained dry and unspoiled? In the next chapter, we will peer into the Vikings' pantries. Creating a food supply was only half the struggle. Maintaining its integrity in a damp climate, within wooden dwellings, and even more so on a ship navigating the Atlantic's salty spray, was equally challenging. Storage logistics was as much an art as preservation itself. On land, storage relied on specialized structures. In affluent estates, this was the stabber, a barn elevated on pillars above the ground. This design addressed several issues simultaneously. Raising it off the ground protected supplies from soil, moisture, and meltwater. The posts supporting the barn were often smoothed or encased with metal sheets. This was essential to guard against rodents, which could not ascend such a surface. In this manner, the Vikings ensured the inviolability of their grain, dried meat, and fish provisions. Cellars and underground storage areas were actively utilized within dwellings. They maintained a consistently low temperature, ideal for storing barrels of fermented products, sour milk preparations, and beer. The cellar was the heart of the home, its strategic reserve. Items needing to remain dry, such as dried fish, stockfish, or smoked meat, were stored by suspension. They were bundled and hung under the barn's roof or in the attic, where a breeze prevented dampness. Only the most robust and compact provisions were transported aboard a longship. Wooden barrels served as the primary containers. The Vikings were unparalleled coopers. Their barrels were sturdy, airtight, and capable of withstanding any rocking motion. We have previously noted the importance of whey, a byproduct of milk production, for preservation. However, the main products, milk and butter, were themselves valuable resources that also required preservation. Fresh milk has a short shelf life, so the Vikings transformed it into white gold, cheese, and butter. This bread is excellent. Try the butter Einar made. It's very rich. The cheese is also superb. We will dine well tonight. Butter production was among the most crucial activities on any farm. Cream was churned into butter, which constituted the primary fat source in their diet. Butter quickly turns rancid when exposed to air. The Vikings employed several methods to preserve it. If salt was accessible, the butter was salted. Heavily salted butter could be stored in barrels for a considerable duration. However, as we know, salt was a luxury, so butter was frequently preserved in bogs. As previously noted, bog butter represented a dependable strategic reserve. Another technique involved rendering, where butter was gently heated to separate pure fat from water and milk solids. The resulting clarified butter was far more resistant to spoilage and could be stored in jars within a cool cellar. Yet the primary method for milk preservation was cheese making. The Vikings crafted a variety of cheeses, including hard varieties that could age for months, improving with time. A firm cheese wheel encased in a rind was an ideal provision for journeys, being calorie-dense and long-lasting. Skyr, while not strictly a cheese, was a thick fermented milk product akin to yogurt. Its high acidity, produced by lactic acid bacteria, allowed skyr to remain viable in cold cellars for weeks or even months. It was more than food. It was a living preservative. Skyr formed the base of many dishes, consumed fresh with berries and also employed to preserve other foods, serving as a versatile protein source. The cheese and skyr production processes also yielded whey, the very substance utilized for meat preservation. This ensured Viking dairy farming was entirely zero waste, supplying fats, proteins, and a preservative. So, what provisions filled the cargo hold of a drakkar embarking on an extended journey to the shores of England or Iceland? The onboard Viking diet directly reflected all the preservation techniques we've discussed. It constituted a meticulously chosen, high-calorie and highly compact menu. The cornerstone of their sustenance was undoubtedly stockfish, wind-dried cod. It was lightweight,
occupied minimal space, and was virtually imperishable. For warriors expending immense energy rowing, this pure protein was essential.
The second most vital item was dried meat, skrapik, or its smoked counterparts. It was similarly light and nourishing, consumable dry like jerky or rehydrated and cooked in soup. Large barrels contained meat preserved in sour whey, providing both protein and fat, readily edible despite its acquired sharp taste. Naturally, cheese was carried aboard. Large wheels of hard cheese served as ideal travel food. They were easily portioned, resistant to spoilage, and delivered substantial energy. Butter, whether salted or melted, was also transported in barrels to enrich porridge. Carbohydrates appeared as crackers or flatbread crafted from rye or barley flour, serving as the Viking equivalent of bread. They also brought dried peas and beans in sacks, which could be boiled in a cauldron if weather permitted. Drinks were also crucial. Water was stored in barrels but quickly spoiled. Therefore, the primary beverage on board was beer, or ale. It was a weak yet nourishing drink that, thanks to hops and alcohol, outlasted water and was safer. All these provisions were stowed below deck or in dedicated lockers. Each warrior likely possessed personal rations, but there was also a communal cauldron, heated on a special stone slab on deck during calm seas. This combination of foods furnished the warriors with all necessary proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. While not the most refined diet, it was highly effective. This scrupulously planned logistics enabled the Vikings to undertake their extraordinary oceanic voyages. Their vessels were self-sufficient strongholds, capable of enduring for weeks on the open sea. Fast the lines! Steady on the tiller! That price is too high for this cut. It is the finest smoked boar in the fjord. I will not go lower. How much for the dried cod? Centuries have passed, and the Viking era has long receded into history. Yet, what remains striking is that their preservation methods haven't vanished. They have not only endured, but have become foundational elements of national identity and culinary pride within Scandinavian nations. What emerged from dire necessity has now transformed into a delicacy. The renowned stockfish from Norway is still produced using the same techniques as a millennium ago. The fish is dried on identical wooden frames in the cold winds of the Lofoten Islands. Today it stands as an expensive export product, cherished by gourmets in Italy and Portugal. Icelandic hakkarl, fermented shark, persists as a national dish. It's presented to tourists as an extreme culinary adventure, but for Icelanders themselves it honors their ancestors who, thanks to this peculiar product, could survive under unforgiving conditions. And here we have the finest hakkarl. Be brave now. Oh wow, that is strong. To our ancestors. Swedish surströmming, fermented herring, is a direct descendant of those ancient fermented goods. Its pungent aroma is globally recognized, yet it remains an integral part of Swedish culture. Okay, stand back. Here it comes. Smoked salmon, meat drying techniques, and traditional cheese production are all living testaments to the Viking Age. While modern technology has altered the scale, the core processes remain unchanged. This underscores the profound effectiveness of their system, which was perfectly adapted to its environment. The Vikings did not seek to conquer nature, but rather integrated with it, harnessing wind, cold, bacteria, and smoke. When we consume a piece of dried meat or smoked fish today, we are, in essence, connecting with that era. We are tasting the same fare that Ragnar or Leif Erikson might have eaten as they embarked on their expeditions. It becomes clear that the Viking world was built not only on strength and bravery, but also on remarkable ingenuity in the most everyday aspects. Their capacity to preserve food without salt, utilizing only natural forces, wind, cold, acid, and smoke, represented a true technological breakthrough. This quiet pantry revolution enabled them to redraw the world's map. From colossal drying racks for fish to the extreme fermentation of poisonous sharks, each method was refined. They forged a system that sustained their armies,
powered their trade and allowed them to thrive in seemingly impossible environments.
What other secrets of the Viking Age would you like to explore? Perhaps their shipbuilding, their beliefs, or the mysteries of their rune stones. Please suggest topics for future videos you'd like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new research.